Tuesday morning, just after opening, the automatic doors let in a rush of warm air and silence, the kind that hangs over a retail floor before the rush begins. Then came the sound no one expected, sharp, loud, and jarring, a slap. It echoed through the store like someone had broken glass. People turned, stunned. The woman stood still. Her face didn't change. But the man, his eyes flickered with something close to regret, though he didn't yet know why. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She didn't need to. Because in that exact moment, the ground he was standing on had already begun to disappear. And all it took was one sentence from her lips, 6 calm words that made every employee freeze. Call your district manager. Right now. The man had no idea who she was. Not a clue that the woman he just slapped was someone with the power to wipe out his entire career with a phone call. No one watching, neither about to witness the destruction of more than just one man's job. Because the fallout wouldn't stop at this store. It would ripple across boardrooms, brands, and bottom lines. But none of that was obvious in the moment. To the customers, she looked like just another black woman being disrespected. To him, she was someone to control, to command. To herself, she was exactly where she needed to be. And when the truth came out, no apology in the world would be enough. Stay with this story, because what happened inside that quiet store did not stay quiet for long. And it ends with a decision that cost millions. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ. We bring you true stories that strike deep and stay with you. Drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? And tell us, what would you have done in her place? Her name is Ava Monroe, age 44. Born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a dry cleaner and still found time to sew Ava's school clothes by hand. Not because they were poor, though they were, but because her mother wanted her daughter to carry herself with pride, even if the world didn't always see her worth. Ava didn't grow up with privilege. She grew up with purpose. The kind that gets passed down quietly through worn fingers and late-night prayers. She wasn't the loudest girl in the room, but she was always watching, always learning. By high school, she was sketching dresses in the margins of her notebooks. By college, she was stitching gowns between classes. Fashion wasn't just her dream, it was her language. She turned that language into an empire. From a used laptop and a second-hand sewing machine, Ava launched Monroe Mode, a fashion brand that defied expectations. Her design celebrated Black beauty, bold structure, and luxury that didn't beg for validation. She didn't chase the approval of high-end gatekeepers. She created her own runway, and people noticed. Quietly, Ava built her business into a powerhouse, not through viral hype or flashy headlines, but through relentless strategy. Within a decade, Monroe Mode became a multi-million-dollar name, first among black designers, then globally recognized. But Ava didn't stop there. She founded Monroe Equity Partners, a private investment firm dedicated to reviving overlooked brands and putting power back in the hands of those long excluded from the conversation. One of her first major acquisitions? House & Lane, a well-known but aging retail chain with over 200 locations across the U.S. She didn't need the spotlight to prove her success. In fact, she preferred the opposite. Ava stayed off magazine covers. No red carpets, no reality show deals. Just her work, her team, and a quietly growing net worth that had crossed into billionaire territory. She made it a point to visit her stores anonymously. She believed the only way to understand her company was to see it through the eyes of a regular customer. No pre-announced visits, no press. That morning at the House & Lane store in Atlanta's Elm Ridge district, Ava wore jeans, a simple blazer, and flats. No jewelry, no designer bag. Just a notepad tucked under her arm and a watchful eye. She wasn't trying to be recognized. She was there to observe. Customer service, layout, merchandising. She wanted to see how her vision was being lived out on the ground. But that morning, Ava Monroe didn't walk into her own store as a billionaire executive. She walked in as a black woman. And to some people, that's all they saw. No title, no legacy, no empire, just someone who didn't look the part. It's not uncommon. Black women are questioned in spaces they built, silenced in rooms they financed, underestimated in companies they own. Ava knew this. She had faced it before. But what happened inside that store didn't feel like passive ignorance. It was direct, dismissive, charged. And what the manager didn't know that day would not just cost him his job. It would cost the company everything he thought he was protecting. It was just after 9 a.m. when Ava stepped through the doors of the House and Lane store in Elm Ridge. No entourage, no clipboard, no fancy shoes, just a black woman in a fitted hoodie, jeans, and well-worn flats. She didn't need attention. She needed truth. The store was quiet. A few staff members were still tidying displays, others chatting near the front. Ava walked the perimeter slowly, scanning racks, noting how products were arranged, how the lighting worked in certain corners. She watched a woman ask for assistance twice before giving up. She saw 2 employees whisper and laugh when a Latina mom asked for a dressing room key. It wasn't just inefficiency, it was something colder. But what made her stop was the young black girl. No older than 19, slim, anxious, clutching a soft blue dress in her hands. She stood by the fitting room area, waiting. You could see the uncertainty in her shoulders, the way she shifted weight from one foot to the other. Ava approached her gently. "Hey, are you okay?" The girl nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I asked someone if I could try this on, and she said she'd be back, but it's been like 10 minutes. Ava glanced toward the counter. 2 employees leaned on it, laughing about something on a phone. "She didn't help you?" Ava asked. "No," the girl replied. "She looked at me and said she was busy. Then she walked off." Ava looked at her, then back at the girl's hopeful eyes. "Wait here. I'll get someone." She approached the counter, not with anger, but with the authority of someone who expected better. "Hi, someone needs help at the fitting rooms." The laughter stopped. One of the women raised her brows. "We're short-staffed," she said flatly. "She can wait." "She already has," Ava replied. That's when he showed up. Daniel Reese, the store manager. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, red-faced, clipped voice. He marched toward Ava like she'd just stepped across a private line. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" he barked. "Yes," Ava said evenly. "That young lady over there has been waiting for help and your team's been ignoring her." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "So you work here now?" "No, Then why are you talking to my staff? You can't just walk in here and start telling people what to do." "I asked for basic courtesy." She was left waiting. Daniel didn't listen. He was already moving closer, voice rising. "I've had people like you come in here before, trying to cause a scene, acting like you own the place. Not today." Ava remained still. "You don't want to do this." "Do what?" he snapped. "Call security? I should have done it the second you walked in." And then, without warning, he raised his hand and slapped her. The sound cut through the air like a whip crack. Sharp, loud, stunning. The girl by the fitting rooms gasped. 2 shoppers froze mid-step. 1 employee dropped a hanger. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't even move. She turned her head slowly back to face him. "Call your district manager," she said. "Right now." Daniel's face was still twisted in anger, but confusion began to seep in. His breathing changed. His eyes scanned the room, realizing people were staring, some filming. One of the younger employees near the register paled. She looked at Ava again, then whispered to her coworker, "Wait, is that the lady from corporate? The one from the email?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Phones started coming out, not just held, recording. Customers started murmuring. One woman mouthed, "Did he just hit her?" Daniel looked around now, realizing the silence was no longer in his favor. "Look," he stammered, "I didn't mean..." She was being aggressive. "She asked for service," someone replied. "She was helping that girl." The girl near the fitting room finally stepped forward, her voice shaking. She didn't do anything wrong, but Ava said nothing more. She stood in the middle of the floor, the red mark on her cheek quietly blooming, the same way her brand had bloomed, without screaming, without warning, and impossible to ignore once it took form. Daniel's bluster drained from him inch by inch as realization sank in. Still, he hadn't put it together, not fully. A staff member at the back, clearly shaken, stepped toward him and said, "Sir, I think that's Ava Monroe." Daniel blinked. "Who?" "The Ava Monroe," the girl whispered. She owns us." Daniel's mouth parted. His chest stopped rising. The blood left his face. Ava didn't have to say another word. The shift in the room spoke for her. She had arrived quietly, but the slap made her visible. And now, there was no going back. The store stood still. Daniel's hand had dropped to his side, but the silence that followed his slap rang louder than any words he could offer. Ava didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Calm and steady, she looked him in the eye and asked one question. Would you like to call corporate, or should I? Daniel scoffed, half laughing. His pride, not yet punctured, pushed him to double down. Ma'am, if you don't leave this store, I will personally make sure security removes you. That was when one of the employees, quiet, maybe 17, slid behind the front counter, picked up a company tablet, and typed something quickly. Her eyes went wide. Her breathing changed. The manager noticed. You, he barked, put that down. This doesn't concern you. But it did. Because her screen showed a face she had seen only once before during a diversity onboarding slideshow. Ava Monroe, CEO and owner of Monroe Mode and House and Lane. She turned the screen to face her coworker. Both stared. The second employee's lips parted in disbelief. Daniel saw them whispering and snapped, "What's going on over there?" The young woman didn't answer him. She looked at Ava, then back at Daniel. "Sir," she said cautiously, "you might want to step away from her." "Why?" She's Ava Monroe. She owns the store. She owns the company." For a second, no one spoke. The customers who had been filming exchanged wide-eyed glances. One woman in a business suit whispered, "Oh my God." Daniel's face twisted, first into confusion, then denial. "No, that's not possible. That's a lie." Ava didn't confirm or deny it. She simply took out her phone and tapped a number. "Get me Marcus," she said into the receiver. "Send corporate security to Elmridge. I'll be here." The call lasted less than 10 seconds. Daniel tried to recover. "Listen, I didn't mean to. There was a misunderstanding. You were interfering with operations. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Ava replied, still calm. "You assumed. And now I'm asking, would you like to call corporate, or should I?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked behind the register, pretending to busy himself with a report that didn't exist. The staff didn't follow. Neither did the tension. 10 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside. 3 plain-clothed corporate security officers stepped into the store, identified themselves, and asked for Daniel Reese. Ava nodded. "He's in back." Daniel looked up as they approached. "Who called you?" One of the officers replied, "Ms. Monroe." Daniel's shoulders slumped. The blood left his face. They escorted him out quietly. No cuffs, no scene. But the shame hung heavier than anything else in the room. Outside, he covered his face as someone shouted, "You slapped the CEO in her own store." Inside, the employees stood frozen. No one dared speak. Ava scanned the room. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the silence. "Close the store. Effective immediately. Notify all district and regional managers. This location is under executive review." One girl, the same one who had pulled up Ava's profile, stepped forward. Are we being shut down?" "No," Ava said. "You're being reset." As the employees began moving to lock the doors, Ava's phone buzzed again. The video was already online. Someone had posted it to TikTok under the caption, "He slapped a billionaire in her own store." House and Lane, CEO. Within minutes, it racked up over 400,000 views. The comments were instant. "This can't be real. He hit the owner?" Racism got him unemployed in 4K. She handled that like a queen. That slap might have just cost them millions. By the time Ava stepped outside, news outlets were already DMing the store's TikTok account, trying to verify the video. A local journalist had driven to the plaza and was waiting in the parking lot. Ava didn't stop to speak. She got into her SUV, shut the door, and disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. But the damage was done, and it wasn't hers. It belonged to a man who thought respect came with skin color. To a system that taught him he had the right to put hands on a black woman without consequence. To a company that would soon learn. When the person you slaps signs your paycheck, it's not just a mistake. It's a reckoning. For 7 days, Ava said nothing. No tweets, no press statements, no interviews. She didn't call for protests or respond to media requests flooding her office by the hour. While the internet debated, dissected, and dissected again, she stayed silent. But that silence wasn't retreat. It was strategy. Because while the world watched the viral video of a white store manager slapping a black woman in what they assumed was just another case of racial profiling, a much bigger reality began to set in. They hadn't just slapped a customer. They had slapped Ava Monroe, the billionaire founder of Monroe Mode and the majority shareholder of House and Lane, the very company that signed Daniel Reese's paychecks. And her silence? That wasn't fear. It was the sound of chess pieces moving. Behind closed doors, boardrooms were in crisis mode. Monroe Mode had just finalized a historic $1.2 billion global licensing deal with Billionaire Group, the multinational conglomerate that also owned several subsidiaries under the House and Lane brand umbrella. The ink was barely dry. Suddenly, Billionaire executives found themselves in damage control. The deal's crown jewel, an international partnership that would bring Monroe Mode into high-end European and Asian department stores, was now on life support. Stock chatter spiked. 2 analysts downgraded Billionaire's ratings within 48 hours of the video going viral. Why? Because Ava had hit pause. Word inside Monroe Equity was that she had instructed her legal team to freeze all forward movement on the deal. Not cancel it outright, but suspend it indefinitely. That move alone was enough to send tremors through investment circles. Then, on day 5, an internal letter from Ava's legal counsel leaked. The document wasn't angry, it was precise, surgical. It outlined a list of demands that would have made most boards flinch. A full diversity audit of all House and Lane locations, mandatory anti-bias and racial equity training across all levels of staff, an internal investigation into prior discrimination complaints, public transparency around disciplinary actions taken, and perhaps most damaging to the conglomerate's image, it requested that Ava Monroe retain the right to publicly disclose the results. Investors panicked. Some tried to pressure her into silence. A few executives offered polished apologies through back channels. One even tried to meet her in person. Ava declined. She wasn't interested in backroom handshakes or PR-crafted remorse. She wanted accountability. She wanted structural change. And more than that, she wanted respect. On day 7, Ava finally broke her silence. In a simple, direct video posted to the official Monroe Mode page, she sat alone in her office. No production team, no fancy lighting, just Ava and her voice. "I've always believed that leadership means showing up, even when it's uncomfortable," she said. "Last week, I showed up to one of my stores, not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, just as a black woman shopping in a place she helped build, and I was slapped for it. Not with words, not with bias alone, but physically, by someone who didn't see my humanity, much less my title. But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been followed in a store, questioned at a checkout line, or humiliated for not looking the part. It's about the systems that reward that behavior, or worse, ignore it. I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to make change." The post hit 1 million views within 2 hours. News outlets scrambled to cover it. Major media platforms replayed the clip with headlines like, "CEO speaks out after being assaulted in her own store." Ava Monroe breaks silence, demands industry-wide reform. Silenced, then seen, the billionaire who refused to be erased. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Ava wasn't just a victim of racism, she was the embodiment of black power, grace, and consequence. Corporate America was on notice. In the weeks that followed, several ripple effects unfolded. 3 other store managers from different House and Lane locations were quietly let go after internal reviews exposed patterns of discrimination and staff mistreatment. 2 regional directors stepped down, allegedly for personal reasons, though sources confirmed their exits followed direct recommendations from Ava's executive team. Ava instituted a zero-tolerance policy for racial discrimination across all Monroe Mode and House and Lane retail locations. Any violation, she stated, would result in immediate termination, with no severance. Internally, some questioned whether she was pushing too hard, too fast, whether her moves would spook investors. But the opposite happened. Monroe Mode's brand values skyrocketed. Customers flooded stores in support, citing Ava's courage as the reason they returned. A Change.org petition demanding permanent policy changes at Billionaire subsidiaries hit 800,000 signatures in 4 days. Black entrepreneurs, activists, and thought leaders rallied behind Ava with hashtags like #HashopWithMonroe and Black Power Means Business. And through it all, Ava never raised her voice. She never insulted, never retaliated. She let the truth speak. And the truth was undeniable. This wasn't just about a slap. This was about a woman who had built something extraordinary, and how in one careless moment a man tried to reduce her to nothing. What he didn't realize? She wasn't just the owner. She was the empire. Ava Monroe's story made headlines because she was a billionaire. Because the slap happened on camera. Because the world finally had a face, a name, and a title attached to something that happens every single day in silence. But her experience wasn't rare. It was just recorded. Across the United States, retail spaces remain some of the most common places where racism shows its teeth. And it often starts with something subtle, a sideways glance, an employee shadowing you down an aisle, being asked repeatedly if you need help when all you're doing is browsing. It has a name: shopping while black. A 2021 Gallup poll found that nearly 65% of Black Americans reported experiencing unfair treatment while shopping in retail stores. Not just in upscale boutiques, but in grocery stores, department stores, and national chains. One of the most well-known cases happened in 2018, when two Black men were arrested in a Philadelphia Starbucks for simply sitting at a table while waiting for a business associate. They hadn't ordered yet, but neither had dozens of white customers sitting around them. Still, someone called the police. Handcuffs were the response. In another case, a Black woman in Michigan was tackled by a beauty supply store owner who accused her of stealing eyelashes. She had a receipt in her hand. His store lost its license after public outrage exploded. These aren't exceptions. They are patterns. In 2020, researchers at the University of Michigan conducted an undercover audit, sending shoppers of different races into retail stores. Black shoppers were 40% more likely to be followed or approached aggressively by staff. In some stores, staff were trained specifically to monitor Black customers more closely, regardless of behavior. And the tragedy is, most of those incidents don't end up on TikTok. Most don't involve billionaires or corporate takedowns. They involve teenagers, students, nurses, teachers, people who walk into stores and walk out with less dignity than they walked in with. Ava's story stood out because she had power, because her last name held weight. But what if she had been 16? What if there hadn't been a camera? What if no one believed her? How many times has a young Black girl been dismissed in a fitting room, just like the one Ava stepped in to help? How many times has a Black father been asked for extra ID to use his own credit card? How many times has someone been told to leave the store without explanation just because their presence made someone uncomfortable? The system doesn't need slurs to be racist. It just needs habits, bias, and unchecked authority. Because in these spaces, Blackness is too often seen as suspicious first and human second. When Ava was slapped, it wasn't just about the hand. It was about the assumption that a Black woman could be corrected, restrained, controlled. He saw her hoodie, not her holdings. He saw her skin, not her ownership. And that's the root of the disease. This story caught attention because the ending was different. Because the woman who was profiled had the resources to respond. She had the legal power to shake the system. But most don't. Most are left with bruises, silence, and a quiet note to themselves. Next time, just leave faster. But that shouldn't be the lesson. Ava's story isn't about revenge, it's about reflection. It's a mirror, and it's one the entire retail industry should be forced to look into. Because if the only reason someone is treated with dignity is because they're rich or famous, then we've failed. Miserably. Everyone deserves the respect Ava had to demand. And no one should have to prove their worth to be treated like a person. Ava Monroe could have taken the payout. She could have accepted the polished apology drafted by PR teams, the closed-door settlement, and a quiet exit. But silence had never built anything in her life. And it wasn't going to start now. She didn't just demand justice, she funded it. 2 weeks after the incident, Ava announced the creation of a new nonprofit, PUBR, Protecting Worth and Respect. Not a branding move, not a damage control stunt. It was a full-scale initiative aimed at disrupting how retail systems view, treat, and value Black customers and employees across America. Its mission was simple: equity at every counter, dignity in every aisle. The first demand Ava issued wasn't a request, it was a condition. If House & Lane was going to keep its place under the Monroe Equity umbrella, all 13,000 employees, from cashiers to corporate officers, would undergo mandatory anti-bias and equity training. Not once, not quarterly, but on a continuous, rotating basis, with outside auditors and real accountability attached. She called out the rot directly. Bias in the workplace doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles, checks your receipt twice, and refuses to make eye contact. That's not policy failure. That's a people failure. But she didn't stop there. Within days of the internal audit being completed, Ava fired the entire regional leadership team that had overseen the Elmridge location. Not for optics, but because they'd received multiple employee complaints about Daniel Reese in the past and had ignored or buried them. There was no sugarcoating in Ava's internal memo. Leadership is not about keeping your job. It's about protecting your people. If you failed to do that, you will not lead under me. Her action sent a message loud enough to echo beyond retail. Then came the most powerful move of all. Ava announced the launch of the Monroe Retail Futures Grant, an annual $10 million fund created to support Black women entrepreneurs starting businesses in the retail and fashion space. Each year, the program would provide startup capital, mentorship, legal resources, and storefront placement opportunities. Not just a check, but access, strategy, and sustainability. In her words, no woman should need to prove her value in a store she walks into. But if the world insists on questioning her power, I'll help her build her own. Applicants came flooding in, hundreds within the first 48 hours. Single mothers with side hustles, college students running online boutiques out of dorm rooms, former retail workers with years of experience and no capital to build for themselves. For every woman who had been dismissed, followed, spoken down to, or treated as a threat, Ava created a space to rise. It wasn't about revenge, it was about resetting the balance. And Ava didn't wait for corporations to applaud her. She knew how quickly the same industry that applauded her success could have ignored her pain. She had seen that before, but now, she had the mic, and she was using it. PWR partnered with HBCUs to embed retail justice curriculum into their business programs. She brought on Black retail veterans as paid consultants to shape industry training. She opened a fellowship program inside Monroe Mode's headquarters for young Black women interested in fashion leadership, not just design, but operations, logistics, and executive strategy. This was not a reaction. This was a realignment. Her vision was bigger than House and Lane, bigger than one store, bigger than that slap. Ava wasn't just cleaning up a mess, she was laying out a new blueprint, and in doing so, she gave every Black girl watching, every woman who had ever been underestimated, disrespected, or silenced, something they didn't always see in stories like this. A sense of agency, a sense of worth, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response isn't a shout or a lawsuit, it's legacy. The internet didn't just react, it erupted. By the time Ava's response video had circled the globe, millions had already watched the original slap clip, but now they were watching for a different reason. She wasn't just the woman in the video anymore. She was a symbol. One tweet captured it perfectly. She's the quiet storm they didn't see coming. Another read, not all power screams. Sometimes it stands still and changes the rules. What followed was an outpouring, stories, messages, and tears from strangers who felt seen in Ava's silence and empowered by her response. A woman in Detroit wrote, "This happened to me in Michigan. I cried when I saw her response. I wasn't believed, but now I feel like maybe my story matters too." A mother from Charlotte sent this message. "My daughter saw this video. It made her believe in herself again. She asked me, 'Mom, can I own something too?'" These weren't isolated reactions. They were echoes, proof that Ava's stand resonated in boardrooms, barbershops, classrooms, and kitchen tables. From Atlanta to Oakland, from New York to Houston, Black women saw not just the injustice, but the power of reclaiming the narrative. Soon, Ava began receiving invitations from places she never expected. Harvard reached out first, asking her to speak at their business ethics symposium. Essence Fest called days later, offering her a headline spot to share her journey with thousands of Black women entrepreneurs. And then came an email from Geneva, the United Nations Human Rights Council, inviting Ava to address their panel on racial discrimination in corporate spaces. But Ava wasn't interested in celebrity. She accepted the invitations not for applause, but to amplify the message. Because as the story spread, one question kept surfacing. How many stories like Ava's stay hidden? How many women are humiliated at counters but never go viral? How many teens are accused of stealing just for walking while Black? How many moments of quiet racism are swept under the rug because the target doesn't own the store, doesn't have the money or the platform to respond? And maybe more importantly, how many bystanders say nothing when it happens? That's the uncomfortable part. Eva didn't film herself. She didn't even want to be recognized. But when that slap landed, phones came out. Not everyone looked away. Still, the question hangs heavy. Would you step in if you saw this happen? Would you stay silent? Or say something? Ava's story has power because of who she is, but its meaning lies in what it reveals about everyone else. How easily power is abused, how quickly people judge, how deep assumptions run. And for every person watching who's never experienced this kind of moment firsthand, Ava's story is more than just a lesson. It's a mirror, because racism in retail doesn't always look like shouting or violence. Sometimes it looks like someone refusing to help, like someone watching and doing nothing, like someone thinking they're in control until they're not. And maybe, just maybe, stories like Ava's are what start to change that. Not just by going viral, but by holding up a lens to a system that's been broken for too long. Ava didn't step into that store to start a movement. She wasn't on a mission. She didn't walk in with cameras or a crew. She didn't walk in as a billionaire or as a CEO. She walked in simply to observe, to see how the store she owned was functioning, to check on the vision she'd spent her life building. But that day, she didn't just check the store. She checked the entire system. And in doing so, she reminded the world of something so simple. It shouldn't need to be said. Black women don't have to wear their worth to deserve respect. The uniform of dignity is not a designer label. It's not a title or a bank balance, and it shouldn't be something you have to prove before you're treated like a human being. What Ava did in the days and weeks that followed wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. She held up a mirror to an industry and made it look at itself, even when it wanted to look away. She held people accountable. She changed policies. She created opportunity where there had been barriers. She chose to respond not with rage, but with resources. And maybe most powerfully, she did it without ever raising her voice. She didn't need to, because the truth was louder than anything she could have shouted. As her store reopened weeks later with a new leadership team, a more diverse staff, and a fresh, welcoming energy, it wasn't just a reopening, it was a reset. Shoppers walked in differently. Employees stood taller. And for many who followed the story, it wasn't just about Ava anymore. It was about possibility. It was about what can happen when one person refuses to stay silent. On the screen, a quote appears. People will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. Ava made people feel seen, heard, believed, and above all, valued. That's not just leadership. That's legacy. Now here's where you come in. Have you ever faced discrimination in a store or public space? Have you witnessed someone being mistreated because of how they look? Tell your story in the comments, not just to be heard, but to remind others they're not alone. And if Ava's story moved you, if it challenged you, inspired you, or made you think, subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for more powerful stories that shine a light where others won't. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we don't just tell the truth. We echo it.